Okay. Excellent, excellent. I always feel like there's a little bit of a delay between when I actually go live and when the rest of the world picks up on it. And it's in those first few 15 seconds when I share all of the lottery numbers that are about to win tonight. So sorry if you all missed that. But I'm going to ramble a little bit while the internet connects me to the rest of the internet. I see people joining in already. That's excellent. Ilsa, hello. Wonderful to see a friendly face. All the faces we've seen in our live streams and in these workshops have been friendly. It's been an absolute pleasure to bring these to you all. Patricia, hello. Don't worry about missing the writing sprint, Ilsa. You can grab the next one. We're doing it every Wednesday. And Pat, I saw that you emailed about some support for the Feedback Friday forum. I hope you got that figured out. It was a toggle on my end that I didn't realize was toggled on, so you should be good to go now. Hello, Taylor from Asheville. Chelsea's back. Thanks for joining us again, Chelsea. TW, hello. All right. And yes, we're live on all social platforms. Yes, please tell us where you're coming from, what you're watching on. Gary from North Carolina, hello. Grace, your first Dabble event. Well, I hope I make it absolutely fantastic for you. I'll do my best. I think we've been having such a great month with these events that I have maybe slightly overconfidence in how much fun we're going to have today. We have Dawn from Asheville, North Carolina as well. A lot of people from Asheville, it looks like. We're just popular there, I guess. Harper from San Diego. Chelsea's from Charlotte. A lot of North Carolina people. NC is North Carolina. Yes, I'm from Canada myself. I just assume slash am fairly confident NC is North Carolina. We have Jordan from California. We have Skip Weissman from Poughkeepsie. Oh, I butchered that one. Mark's first Dabble event, Huntsville, Alabama, with Aaron there. Josh from Denver, Ida from Florida. So many people joining us for the first time. I'm thrilled that you can be here. We're going to just delay another few minutes to make sure everyone can get in. We know, as we can see, there are people coming from everywhere. Ilsa's from the Netherlands. Adri's from Barcelona. Awesome. I love seeing people from overseas. I love knowing that I'm chatting with people from such different places on the planet. North Carolina is in fact North Carolina. Thank you, Chelsea. Oh, good. And I got it. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks, Skip. Harper's a Canadian transplant. I'm from Barrie. If you're from the GTA, you know that I'm about an hour north of Toronto for other folks who don't know Canadian geography that well. Rita from Albuquerque, awesome. Rachel from Washington, D.C. TW's from the UK. This is fantastic. I do want to point out, or maybe I'll actually share the link again. Bear with me for just a moment here, my friends. If you see in the YouTube description, we've now updated it with the link to give you that downloadable resource that comes with all of our workshops. And I'm just going to grab that so we can share it in the chat here, just in case you aren't watching on YouTube or you're having some difficulty there. And there you go. It should be shared or sharing. 2 p.m. is 8 p.m. for Ilsa. That's excellent. 2 p.m. is perfect timing for me too. Harper's from Vancouver by way of Ottawa. Awesome. I'm born in Ottawa myself. There we go. All right. We'll give people another moment here. We'll at least wait till 2:05. I will say, if you're hanging out in the chat, have you done any writing today? And if so, what did you write? Bonus points if it's dialogue, but I won't hold it against you if it is not dialogue. I myself wrote a pretty dialogue heavy piece while we were doing our writing sprints this morning. And I'll use that to shamelessly share that we do writing sprint Wednesdays every Wednesday. Today it was at 11 because Hank and I were filling in. Pat, you got the response you needed. Excellent. I will take another moment to shamelessly plug an event happening tomorrow. If you hang around any of these events, you know that I like to shamelessly plug things. Um, but I'm going to pop a link in the chat for our craft Q&A office hours submission form. If you have any questions about the craft, Hank and I will be live tomorrow, same time, same place, to answer any questions. All right. Uh, Grace, how often do these events happen? I need a lot of help with my fantasy book. We're aiming for one workshop from myself every month. We're doing feedback Fridays bi-weekly, craft Q&A office hours bi-weekly, writing sprints every week. That's on top of all the articles on W. Right now we have 2 going up a week, in addition to the 400 plus that are already there for you. Mark's been editing my latest novel, so there's been a lot of dialogue editing. I'm with you there. Dialogue is one of those things that is really hard to get on the first draft, and I will make no claims that I get it perfect the first time around, or even sometimes the second or third. But that's what revisions are for. Gary's been heavy editing. Awesome. Word seems to not like all the slang from Mark. Yeah, it does that. You should add it to your dictionary. That's what I do when I'm writing in Dabble, especially with fantasy names that I'm coming up with. Add it to the dictionary. All right. Advika was writing 5 minutes ago and writing a murder, but lots of dialogue for Ida. Awesome. Okay. Excellent. I wish I could just converse back and forth, but I am here for a purpose. I do love all this engagement, though. Let's keep it up. And Ali's first Dabble live watching via Instagram, realized it was on YouTube. Yeah, we're trying to get it on Instagram. It's a little tough because the messages there don't come through to us. And when we're being this interactive, when we're sharing stuff, it's hard to hang out in the Instagram chat at the same time as everywhere else. All right. And Chelsea loves writing dialogue. Absolutely. Okay, cool. So we're going to get started. Let me take my sip of water. This will be a recurring theme throughout the entire process today. But as someone reminded me last time, I should bring backup water. So I have so much. I have a small lake's worth of water today. All right, let me get this. There we go. So welcome everyone to this workshop on writing dang good dialogue. And that's just the fun term I use for it because dang and dialogue is like a little bit of an alliteration. You got the G at the end of dang, you got the G at good. I don't need to over explain it to you. I just think it's a little fun. In this workshop, this is our agenda. We have the introductions. We've kind of started that already, just hanging out, getting to know each other, sharing what we've been writing, and we'll go over a few housekeeping details. Then we're going to go into the fundamentals of dialogue. We're going to talk about the 3 steps to writing dialogue, writing authentic dialogue, extra tips and tricks to wrap it up. And I am having a little bit of trouble with my internet today. So if it does freeze up, please let me know because I don't want to just blitz through something and leave you hanging. But don't worry, I'm working on a new internet service provider. All right. So who am I? We do have a lot of new faces in the chat today. I know a lot of people have been around for all the events we've been doing, so you've come to know me by now. But my name's Doug. I've been writing for Dabble for I want to say almost 3 years now. And in that time, over 100 articles, written 2 ebooks for them. Now I'm on managing this new premium content while editing and making some more content at the same time. Outside of that, I've written 5 novels. 3 of them were #1 new releases. One was a #1 bestseller in its category. And outside of that, I'm an editor, husband, dog dad, nerd. It's Dungeons and Dragons night tomorrow night, as it is every Thursday. And that's that in addition to horror movies, probably my favorite hobbies in what little spare time I have after all of those other things on the list. Let's just cover some expectations while we're in the workshop today. First, ask questions. We do have a dedicated time for Q&A afterwards. We have office hours tomorrow if I can't cover it here or it's a little beyond the scope of this workshop. And I like taking a break to just hang out in the chat while we're going, keep people engaged, let's see what people are thinking, adapt as we go, because this is more about you all learning than it is about me just rambling at a screen. Collaborate. That means that if I don't notice something in the chat and it's a question and you do have the answer, then please feel free. Absolutely. You can all chat with each other. We're all writers here. Most of us, if not all of us, dabblers. And so get to know each other and let's help each other out. And be kind. There is absolutely no space for hate or prejudice or being rude to one another. That's a surefire way to get yourself kicked out. So that has never happened. Um, Patricia, I keep getting an error message when downloading the style sheet template email to Alicia. That's a problem. Bear with me for 1 second here. My workshop friends. And I'm just going. Oh, and when I pull up the video, it's just my voice on an echo. Isn't that horrendous? It seems to be working for me. Pat, try the description of this video underneath the chat there, and let me know if that link works. Otherwise, yeah, please email Alicia and she'll just send it to you directly. All right. So before we get any farther, I want to just do a quick poll for anyone that's willing to chat in the chat there. Where are you right now in your feeling about writing dialogue? How do you feel about most of the dialogue that you write? Give me a 1 if you are very confident and use it effectively. 2 if you mostly know what you're doing. 3, your characters can talk, so that's something. 4, you know it's a skill you want to improve. Or 5, you wish you could write a novel without anyone speaking whatsoever. For myself, I mean, I'm very confident in using dialogue, but that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily a number 1, right? I usually hover around that number 2 mark, and it's through outside feedback and constant learning that I improve my dialogue the whole way. I don't know truly if any author is always at a number 1, except for Chelsea, because that came in just as I brought it in. And Ali loves dialogue. That's the thing too. If you are a dialogue writer, if you excel at it, then it's something that you are very confident in. It comes intuitively from all that practice. But I see a lot of 2s, 3s, 4s. There we go, 2 to 3-ish. Awesome. 4 there too. My royal elves sound like they're from Windsor, Vermont. That's fair. And we're going to cover voice. Don't worry. We're going to get there. So awesome. Okay, we have a nice broad spectrum here, which I love to see. And even if you are at number 5, that's fine. If you're at a number 1, hopefully there's something that you can learn from me while you're here. Dialogue usually comes first for Chelsea there. Yeah, absolutely. And for me, fight scenes comes first. But yeah, at some point along my writing career, I realized that fight scenes do not make a book. It's just a fun element to it, and dialogue is an even more important element to those books. All right. So, part 1, we're going to start with the fundamentals. And if you did answer 1 or 2 to that, this might seem a little bit repetitive to you. And you might already know a lot of this content, but bear with me, especially from an editing perspective. There are a lot of things that I see writers do, even when they are very skilled and experienced writers, that they happen to make mistakes on when it comes to dialogue. And that's both from a qualitative point of view, but also from just a fundamentals point of view. So in the basics, we're going to cover the purpose, the structure, and by structure, I mean where it actually fits into the rest of your prose and how you can take advantage of it, the dialogue tags, and formatting your dialogue. So what's the point of dialogue? As writers, dialogue isn't just a way for your characters to talk. And most of the time, if your characters are speaking, there's a purpose behind it. And we can use that as authors to do more than just communicate with between characters. First, it's an effective way of using that show don't tell rule. Now you got to be a little careful here, because what you're showing is usually character related. You show that someone's sad. You show that they're stressed. You show that they're hopeful through the words that they're saying, or through how they're conversing with someone, or through their tone. You don't use dialogue as an excuse to drop 2 pages of exposition. That's not okay. So dialogue gives us that opportunity to show, don't tell. 2, if you do deliver exposition, it can come organically. Again, we're not going for 2 pages. We don't want an info dump here, but it makes a lot of sense in a conversation for information to come up when you need it to. But you need to make sure you're doing it in an organic manner. That means that the conversation still has to flow, it still has to make sense, and has to stay true to the characters themselves. And it doesn't mean that they can just out of the blue drop a hint that you want your characters to have to pursue a lead or a mystery or something like that. That will feel incredibly awkward. And 3, it's a tool for character development, plot advancement, and relationships and tension building. Character development, a lot of stuff can come out from dialogue. That's how we really get a glimpse into the hearts and minds of characters, especially if it's a non-POV character. It's also how we determine their attitude on things. It's how we get to know them better. Is one of the best tools for character development. It's also used for advancing the plot. That is some of that exposition drip, but it can also drive conflict. It can share information that needs to be shared, both for the characters and for the reader. But again, we're walking that fine line. And then relationships and tension. You can't have relationships without some form of communication. And generally, that communication comes down to speaking. But at the same time, if there is okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Oh, didn't want to add my friend Hank there. Okay, my apologies. Like I said, I'm in a constant battle with my internet service provider today. We're back. Okay, can someone let me know where I cut out? What was the last thing that left my mouth there? Let me get back to where we were. I'll take this moment to take a sip of water. And send out the good vibes that that never happens again, because I understand it's a very frustrating thing for both of us, but extra for everyone who set aside time today to join us. All right, we're wrapping up the tool for number 3. Excellent. So it is a character development tool. It's a plot advancement tool, but it also gives you that area to explore relationships, to show their degradation or their growth, to show the results of what's happened in a relationship, or to make it really tense. Thank you. Sends good vibes. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. But it's okay. We take it in stride, people. We're um, all right. Now we're going to talk about dialogue in terms of structure. And again, I'm not talking about how to format dialogue in this situation. I'm talking about how dialogue itself fits into the structure of storytelling and writing. And there's a number of ways that this structure can be used to our benefit if you understand how it works. First, there are rules with that like everyone knows about dialogue, whether it be writers or readers. And it's these rules that we intrinsically know that allow us to add in all this extra punctuation without being a disruptive force in our novel. There is no other situation that I can think of in storytelling, in prose like what we write in fiction, where you can add so much more punctuation and so many line breaks and it not be disruptive. But we can use that structure to our advantage by doing things like integrating a seamless flow. Your dialogue, when written properly, should flow with the rest of your writing. It shouldn't be jarring unless that's the explicit intent. At the same time, this structure allows us to control the pacing using dialogue intermixed with prose, whether that be world building or actions or reactions. You can use dialogue, the actual way it's written in your story, to control the pacing of your work. You also want to balance it out too, because nonstop back and forth dialogue is exhausting. It is tiring. So you want to make sure that there's some happy balance there. And then you want to understand the purpose too. And this is purpose shared from you to the reader. When someone is reading dialogue, there's this unspoken rule that what they're reading has a purpose. It's not just meaningless small talk. And this is something that we're going to revisit again and again is whatever you write needs to be intentional. Small talk stinks. I think you'll see that explicitly stated later on in the presentation. Um, so make sure that whatever you're including, it's there. Otherwise, you are just expanding your word count for no reason. Okay, now we're moving into one of my favorite things to talk about, and that's dialogue tags. And a lot of people will hear dialogue tags and they'll groan. They'll say this is boring. But what I mentioned before, from an editing perspective, this is where a lot of writers don't know everything. They don't know the rules when it comes to dialogue, and they end up doing things that don't make sense. And so, if you want to be friends with your editor, or you want a more efficient process, or you don't want these mistakes to slip through the cracks, you need to understand dialogue tags. So, dialogue tags, also known as attributions, are little pieces of words that explain who's speaking and how they're saying it. And realistically, you can cut that definition in half because they can, at points, just explain who is speaking. You can understand dialogue tags through this cute little equation that we have here for any math fans in the audience, and is noun plus or noun or pronoun plus verb equals dialogue tag. So she said, he said, they said, he declared, they whispered, the magician recited, the killer yelled, my best friend joked. Those are all examples of dialogue tags. The noun or the pronoun is the character's name or pronoun that they use that references who was doing the talking. Pretty straightforward. The verb is a speaking verb, and this is where a lot of people get hung up. A verb that the speaking verb either is says or said, depending on the tense you're using, a synonym for says, which is stated, claimed, whatever it may be, or a related verb that's a little less basic than speaking. So shouted, muttered, yelled, joked, recited, whispered, all that sort of stuff. Um, but what you need to understand is that there's some leeway in that. And as we see Grace saying here, lots of dialogue text on top of each other make a reader want to punch themselves in the face. Yes, yes, that's absolutely true. And it can get overwhelming if you lean super far into just basic he said, she said, or lean way too far into more flair in there, which we're going to talk about on this next slide, which is adding some flair to your writing. So dialogue tags can be made a little more fun, a little more specific, and a little more detailed by adding adverbs, objects, or other specifics to them. So she said excitedly, he declared to the crowd, they whispered in the silent library. The magician recited, feeling the spell form at her fingertips. The killer yelled, victory assured. My best friend joked like they always did in awkward situations. All of these have expanded it and added an extra element of detail that can help immerse your reader and keep them connected to your work. But they all still serve the purpose of explaining who said something. And in some cases, or in all the cases in this case, how they said it. Now, there are extra details. So he declared to the crowd. That tells you who he's speaking to. They whispered in the silent library, tells you where they are. The magician recited, feeling the spell form at her fingertips, is a compound sentence, right? Those are two separate ideas, which leads me to what aren't dialogue tags. And this is the big one. This is, if you take nothing else away from, again, from the editor brain that I have, if you take nothing else away from this, take this away, that dialogue tags describe who speaks and how they say it, not actions associated with it. And the first one on the list, I want you to put a little asterisk beside. She sighed, he growled, they kicked, Charlotte shrugged, the werewolf whimpered. These, except for sighed in some cases, or growled even, aren't dialogue tags. These are descriptions of actions. She sighed means she said something and then went, huh. Now I say put an asterisk beside this because you can technically sigh short bouts of words, like one or two words, like my internet, when I'm complaining about my internet dropping out, right? Or you can growl words. It, that's more genre specific, I think, and some people love that. You cannot growl whole sentences. It just the capacity for a human being or an elf or an orc isn't there to do it. They kicked doesn't have anything to do with the dialogue itself, right? So this is important because understanding that this isn't a dialogue tag means you're not making punctuation or formatting errors when you do it. They can still kick after speaking. They can kick while speaking, but this is not a dialogue tag. Same with shrugged. Shrugged is a big one that I see every now and then. Um, You can shrug while speaking. You can shrug in response to speaking. You can shrug before speaking, but shrugging is not a dialogue tag. And whimpering, again, you can whimper short things, but that's more the action of complaining about something. So just bear that in mind. Again, there's no quiz, but at the end of this, I might ask someone, "Hey, is this a dialogue tag?" And if you say yes, and it's kicked, I'm gonna feel real bad about myself. All right, now we're gonna move on for the eternal debate of to said or not to said. And just before we do this, I'm gonna take a sip of water, and I'd love if someone in the chat could say that we're still good on the internet. We're not having any hangups or hiccups or anything. And I will wait for that response because there we go. All good now. Thank you, Ilsa. And I just see here Destiny from Dallas, Texas for the first time. Destiny, welcome in. Awesome. Thank you all for letting me know that. That's good. Okay. When it comes to dialogue tags, there is this eternal argument of to said or not to said. And that is most people side or I'd argue that most dialogue tags fall in the said camp. He said, she says, they said, the magician says, one of those two. Or they're saying if you're writing in present tense. But that's we'll skip out on that one for now. On the other hand, there are some people that think said is boring. It's not engaging enough. So there's two sides to this camp. So on the to said side, it is the most common. That means that it's the most easily recognized or ignored for the most part because it blends into your writing. Going back to how the structure of dialogue itself lends to a seamless flow, this helps a lot. We just kind of skip over said because we understand that it connects with the quotation marks. It also minimizes fluff. I am the king of writing fluff, of writing purple prose. And so I I tend to take every chance I get to do use something other than said and then catch it on the way back through when I'm revising because sometimes you just go over the top. And Advika said that in the chat when they overuse some verbs. Yes. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, said is boring. Said does its job, and it does that job while blending in, but sometimes you don't want to blend in. Sometimes you don't want a stack of he said, she said, they said dialogue tags. So you can add variety by, shouting or by whispering or yelling or joking or however you want to put it. It also enhances details. You can become more active and engaged with your reader when you give them more to work with. And so there's a difference between writing, oh, my internet's down again, he said, or oh, my internet's down again, he complained. It there isn't necessarily one that's better than the other, but complained lends a little bit of gravitas or weight to the dialogue that precedes it. Now, that being said, there is kind of a decision you have to make, and that decision should skew towards using said more than not said. Yeah, I'm not going to put a percentage to it because some people will argue it should be like 90-10 divided between the two. Some will say it should be 50-50. But really, it should be said as your default. Kind of your fingers should just do that on their own. But if you want to really up the ante, then you go to something else and be intentional about it. If you're going to include something other than said, there needs to be a reason for it and not just to make it fluffy. And to bring up another debate now, we're going to go with adverbs. All right. So I took a quote from Stephen King here in On Writing where he talks about adverbs because instead of choosing a different word than said, some people will take said and tack an adverb onto it. He said softly. She said uh, politely. And adverbs generally are seen as weak writing. As Mr. King says here, I believe the road to hell is paved with adverbs, and I will shout it from the rooftops. To put it another way, they're like dandelions. If you have one on your lawn, it looks pretty and unique. If you fail to root it out, however, like I have, you find 5 the next day, 50 the day after that. And then, my brothers and sisters, your lawn is totally, completely, and profligately, I struggle with that word, covered with dandelions. By then, you see them for the weeds they really are, but by then, it's too late. Now, what Stephen King has done here while pointing out how adverbs aren't necessarily the best, he has gone and used 3 adverbs. And I'm not saying that Stephen King made a mistake. I would never never do that. But it's intentional, right? There is a place for them. So when it comes to adverbs, though, before we move on to, I believe, our last one of our last points about dialogue tags, is that adverbs do have a place in writing, but they are most of the time weaker than alternatives that you can use. So if you said he said sadly, uh, he mumbled is much better than he said sadly. So if you use that to kind of weigh yourself on the debate of said versus not said, said is generally more preferred. Not said is preferred to said plus an adverb, if that makes sense. I hope that all makes sense. I see Ilsa in the chat here. I've learned to add to said and asked as much as possible. As my teacher said, other dialogue tags are distracting from your dialogue. Yes, yeah, and so they can be. I don't think that you'll find a book out there, at least one that I've read, that is completely devoid of other verbs used in dialogue tags. But the majority, again, should be said or says, depending on your tense. Advika says, other people are scared of heights and stuff, and my worst fear is adverbs. That's pretty good. Don't fear adverbs, because adverbs, again, they have their place. Writing will include adverbs, as Mr. King there pointed out. Um, but like, just learn to identify them. Learn to, in your revisions, find a stronger way to say them. Here, a great question from Pat before we move on a little bit more. If you know who the speaker is and the motion is already obvious, must you use a dialogue tag? No, no. And that's a wonderful transition for me, Patricia. I'll send over that payment for that perfectly timed question after the workshop, because now we're going to talk about when you use dialogue tags. So use dialogue tags more than anything else to establish who's speaking. That's their actual function. That is what they exist for. And it's just, again, in that structure that is so easily read by our readers, this is what they do. You can also use them to say how something is said. We just talked about the different ways to do that. And then if you're switching speakers in a conversation, dialogue tags help you with that. So when you can chill out with the dialogue tags, use them sparingly just as a principle. Repeated use of dialogue tags can be distracting for a reader, especially when you go with non-said says dialogue tags. And we mentioned that earlier with the stack of tags comment. Shorter dialogue equals less tags. If your lines of dialogue are only a few words long, try thinking of other ways to use action around the dialogue to indicate who's speaking. If you have a dialogue tag that's like 5 words long and the dialogue itself is 2 words long, that imbalance is going to mess up with your flow. In a conversation, oh shoot, did I freeze again? I'm just noticing in the comments here. LC Lee says I've been frozen for 20 minutes, but am I frozen for everyone? No, I'm working for Advika. Okay. It might be here. Let me share it. If I'm frozen for you, try refreshing. Please. There we go. Okay, so it looks like I'm frozen for some people. But yeah, I apologize if Elsie's been frozen for 20 minutes. Oh no, I feel really bad about that. But I'm glad I'm not frozen for the rest of the folks here. So in a conversation with 2 people, uh, you can start omitting the dialogue tag if it's a lot of back and forth, and especially if you've developed strong character voices, which is our 4th point here. But you'll often see in writing, if it is just 2 people speaking, you'll have dialogue tags to start, and then they'll start getting omitted. And that can actually help with the pace as well and keep driving your reader forward. Awesome. And then the character voice, which we'll talk about later in this workshop. The character voice is the most important thing I think you can develop when it comes to writing dialogue. And this is how each individual character speaks and communicates in their own way. And as let me pull it up here. Let me pull up Pat's message again. Um, If you know who the speaker is and the emotion is already obvious, you have to use a dialogue tag. If you've developed a character's voice strongly enough, then a reader should, for the most part, be able to identify when they're speaking, even without a dialogue tag. That's when you've really nailed it. Will that happen with every character? No. Does that mean you shouldn't use dialogue tags? Absolutely not. They're an important part of writing and communicating, but this is what we're aiming for when we're talking about writing really good dialogue, or dang good dialogue, as we say it. Question here from Grace. My professor told me to use said as little as possible without being annoying. About where is the balance? That's a really tough question to answer without seeing your work. Um, again, the more you develop the voice of a character, the less you can use. He said, she said, they said. But it's really tough. Like, I can't put a numerical value on what that balance should be. What you can do is use the feedback process after you've written. Like, don't stress about it too much during your first draft. Just write what feels good. Go back and revise it. And if you think it's too often, then you can start weeding it out. Then when you leverage beta readers or a critique partner or a line editor, then you can tell them, hey, this is what I'm kind of cognizant of. This is what I'm looking out for. Can you let me know if this is an issue? We're also always going to be more critical on ourselves than a reader will be. Let's bear that in mind, especially after you learn everything there is to know about writing dialogue. Once you've taken it all to heart, you're going to like look out for those errors that readers won't even notice. And I'm not saying don't look out for them, but you're going to be more critical than they will be. All right. Okay, and then last in terms of my dialogue tag spiel. And then we'll move on to some more important things, even though I think this is super important for literally everyone, is where you put dialogue tags or attributions. There are three options. Before, Dorothy said, wow, this place filled with flying monkeys and toxic flowers and evil witches is actually terrifying. Note, when you put it before, it is a comma after the tag and a capitalization once you open up the quotation marks there for the dialogue. Then you can put them in the middle, and there are two ways that you can do this. It wasn't my fault, but my house, Dorothy whispered, pausing ever so slightly, fell on someone. That's what they all say, the police captain of Oz muttered. We'll take the rest of your statement down at the station. Now, this is, maybe I'll write Wizard of Oz fanfic or something. In these cases, the dialogue tag comes in the middle, but it occurs in two different ways. So in the first one, when Dorothy's whispering, we have a comma offsetting her dialogue tag with a little bit of action in between it. And that in itself denotes a pause. And so that's a way to control the pacing. Some people would say you put an M dash either inside the quotes or outside of them, depending on the style that you're following. A comma, for the most part, is generally fine. It depends on how hard you want the interruption to be. And then this other one, that's what they all say, comma, the police captain of Oz muttered. Note that it's a comma and then lowercase t on the police captain of Oz muttered, because we have our noun, the police captain of Oz, the verb muttered, and so you connect them with the comma. If the dialogue tag didn't exist, if it was just a separate action, then we would have a period there. We'll take the rest of your statement down at the station. And then after, you've got to be kidding. Dorothy's innocent, the Cowardly Lion said, suddenly finding his voice. And again, this is probably the most common dialogue tag you'll see, one that comes afterwards. And this is intentional. It's again for pacing purposes, because you want to tell people what's happening and then follow it up with the more innocuous part that's tagged on with a little bit of detail and suddenly finding his voice. Look at that adverb. And I'm not even ashamed of it. But we'll note here too, though this dialogue ends with an exclamation mark, it is a lowercase t when we're doing the attribution. And again, the noun, the Cowardly Lion, the speaking verb said. There we go. Okay. Christopher asking real quick, do dialogue tags help when writing with audiobook format in mind? I find the lack of tags sometimes impacts the listening experience if the conversation goes on for a length of time. That's a very interesting question, and I welcome anyone else to provide feedback on that in the chat as well. Dialogue tags, unless you're getting your audiobook formatted more as an audio production where they omit the tags and it's multiple actors, it's still important. An actor will likely have different voice styles for different characters, but there's still information included in tags generally that can help out a listener. I've never found, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks, I've never found that my experience is hindered by the presence of dialogue tags. But again, if anyone else has any thoughts on that in the chat, I more than welcome your feedback for Christopher there. Okay, formatting, we just touched on this briefly, uh, but we're talking about punctuation here. Commas are used to connect dialogue to a dialogue tag. You can't use them in any other situation in at the end of dialogue. Like obviously, if you're writing a sentence, it can have a comma in it, but at the end, a comma connects that dialogue to a dialogue tag. A period, on the other hand, disconnects it. What comes after the quotation marks in the period is not a dialogue tag if you put a period there. That's just a rule. Question or exclamation mark can function as both, which is where a lot of people kind of slip up. So when you're using a question or exclamation mark, if it's connected to if it's a dialogue tag that follows, you do the lowercase, it is connected just as if it was a comma. Otherwise, you can follow it up with a different sentence, a different verb, a different detail that's not a dialogue tag, in which case you capitalize it and they're functioning as a period in this case. And M dash is show interruption, the most sacred punctuation of all, the greatest thing to ever bless our books, the M dash. And that's usually followed by something that actually interrupts it. The whole purpose is a sharp interruption with the M dash. Allie's going to have to watch the replay, but needs to go put the kids to bed. Allie, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the replay. Don't forget to grab your cheat sheet when you come back. But thanks, and we hope to see you at future events. And then formatting, and I pinky promise this is the last of the basics and the grammar and my editorial side shining through. But there are these 4 rules that I want you to keep in mind when you're formatting your dialogue, and this plays right into that structure benefit that we discussed before. So new paragraphs, every time a new character speaks, include a line break to differentiate them. If you don't, your reader is going to be confused. And I've seen some work that does it well enough, but that's so far the exception that I don't even think about it when I'm writing. New paragraph every time someone speaks, every time someone different speaks. Quotation marks. We have an international audience here, so you're going to need to double check on your local rules if you're writing following those local conventions. In the US and in Canada here, we use double quotation marks on either end and the punctuation is kept inside. I know we have some folks from the UK where they use single quotation marks. I think the same is in Australia because they follow the Queen's English or the King's English now. And then I know French has some even more differentiated rules when it comes to quotation marks and punctuation in dialogue. So, from the perspective of a North American writer, double quotation marks, punctuation inside that ending quotation mark. Understand your attributions for formatting. You should be a pro by now. We just spent a good deal of time talking about that. If there's something you still don't understand about it, drop a comment in the chat so that we can cover it in our Q&A, or go back to that link I shared about the craft Q&A office hours and we can answer it there too. I don't want anyone to feel ashamed about asking a question because all questions are great questions. I love seeing them. And then long dialogue or multi-paragraph dialogue. If you have really long piece of dialogue, don't just make it a wall of text. You can break it up into paragraphs just as you would any other piece of writing. When you do that, and again, this is basing it off of North American quotation marks, you do not close the last line of a paragraph with quotation marks unless it's the very last line of dialogue. So if you have 3 paragraphs, all of someone just speaking, which is fine in certain situations, the last line of the first paragraph has no closing quotation marks. The first line of the second paragraph has those opening ones, does not have the closing ones, and then the third one has the opening ones and has the closing ones to denote that that person's done speaking now. That's a lot. That's a lot of rules. I threw a lot of rules at you all. I hope we're feeling good. I hope you're now looking forward to some more of the qualitative, substantive stuff when it comes to writing dialogue. But we needed to establish this stuff because if you don't really get this, then understanding how to do character development through dialogue it falls flat because you'll be misusing the tool. But now it's a water break. Okay, let's move into part 2. 3 steps to writing dialogue. When we cover these, Pat struggles a lot with that one. Good. I hope, like, take the time, rewatch this. It's always available to you. Or, again, submit the question or just study it. Like, it's something that you really need to practice and get ingrained in you. And then it'll just become second nature. Like, I'm sure there are a bunch of writers watching this who have maybe written a few books or have been writing short stories all their life or something, and like, Doug, I get this, I understand this part about dialogue, and that's fine, but that's because you've done it so much. Or that's even someone who's read, you know 10 books a month or something. They'll think that they know all the rules about dialogue, but they'll still mess up. I'll still mess up every now and then, unless I'm putting together a very rigorous workshop like this one. All right, so the 3 steps to writing dialogue. We're going to go over how to form effective dialogue here in 3 simple steps. And when we're going through it, I don't want you to think that you need to go through 1, 2, and 3 every time someone opens their mouth in your book, because most of this will come naturally to you. But when you understand the why behind it and how it comes together, then you'll be able to write more effective dialogue. So, all dialogue wants to say something, intentionally obscures it, and then adds some flair, because we're writers. We're writing something that is worth reading. We're not just writing like instruction manuals at this point. So we're starting with the basics. Good dialogue's nuance flows well, makes your reader feel like a real person is speaking it, but it all stems down from something basic, like a character wanting to know what's going on. Why did you do that? Is something wrong? How do you feel? Are we safe? These are all questions, but they can also be things like, I want to share something with you. I am scared of this. I'm excited. These are basic communication pieces that we want to get across, or characters want to get across in dialogue. And every piece of dialogue, because small talk stinks, every piece of dialogue you include should have some basic meaning behind it. It's there for a purpose. If it's not there for a purpose, why are we including it? So then you don't oh, you don't want to just write what's going on. Why, like, you don't want to be so blunt about it, because that's not fun to read. That's not why readers pick up books. That's not going to get them lost in your world or connect them with your characters. There are instances where "are we safe" can be a particularly compelling question. "Is something wrong" can be a very heartfelt question. But for the most part, these blunt statements are just not enough for our purposes. So then our characters are going to intentionally obscure what they're asking, and not in a way to hide their intentions, but they're going to express it in their own unique way. So, what's going on can be said instead. Doug said you could use a hand, right? That's not asking the question anymore. One's implying, hey, what's happening over here? I'm here to help. Why did you do that? Becomes, did you think about the consequences? A character who's worried about the future and not necessarily the present. Is something wrong? You look like you haven't slept. Could be passive aggressive, could come from a place of genuine concern, but either way, it intentionally obscures the initial statement or intention. Intentionally obscures the initial intention. um, but does it in a more poetic way, almost, or a more character oriented way. How do you feel? That argument was intense, huh? And are we safe? Did you arm the security system? A very specific question asking about a very specific action, but when you translate it, it's they're worried about their safety, at night when they're sleeping. Did you arm the security system? So when you're thinking about ways to obscure that initial thought, think about a character's voice and their circumstances and how they would actually ask that question. This is where voice comes into play. And again, we're going to develop that soon. And then you're going to add some flair to it. And I didn't want to do too many like examples for this one because they would be long, because I'm a very verbose person. But now's when you take that obscured message or question, turn it into literary gold. And this is where you add details about the setting. You throw in dialogue tag to add those extra verbs or those extra specifics. Use pacing to your advantage by interspersing some action. Or you just show, kind of through a little bit of exposition, maybe some internal monologue, what the hidden meaning is. There's a lot of different things you can do, but this is where you take the actual artistic part of your writing and put it to work. So again, just to recap these 3, you start with something very basic. This is what they want. You obscure it through that character's lens and their situation, and then you add your own writing flair to it. And that's, again, I said if I want you to take away anything from this, it's what dialogue tags aren't. But this is the foundation of good dialogue. If you can start naturally doing this, your dialogue is going to go from basic to quite good. Christopher, I have to write instruction manuals for my job. It isn't great. I've seen in so many places, ways to make money writing, and it might be instruction manuals, but at least it's writing, right? And I had to do a technical writing course in college. I did not enjoy it. So more power to you, Christopher. All right. So those are the three steps to just crafting good dialogue, but we want to move into the realm of authentic dialogue. And authentic dialogue is really tough to write. You can be a prose genius. You can write some of the best world building. You can come up with really cool characters and magic systems. Okay, no, we're yeah, frozen again. My sincere apologies, everybody. I know how frustrating this is for you, but hopefully we should be back. Give me okay, Patricia's all good. Yeah, it did drop for a second. I tried to send a sorry folks, bear with me in the chat, but what do you know? The internet was out. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your patience. Okay. Someone give me a quick, what was the last thing I said? Probably those winning lottery numbers I was chatting about at the very beginning. If you didn't get them, sorry. All right. Well, we are okay, magic system. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. Um, yeah, so you can be a great writer, but if your dialogue isn't authentic, readers aren't going to enjoy your book as much and they might put it down. That's the way it is. So, when it comes to authentic dialogue, there are a few things that we can look at, and I try to be as comprehensive as possible here. But there will always be more stuff to this. There will always be little tidbits that you can bring from your own experience and your own thinking to it. But these are some really big ones that you want to work with. So up first, well, actually, sorry. These six things: character voice, subtext, dialects and accents, mirroring real life, being consistent, and avoiding cliches are the six that we're going to be looking at to make that dialogue feel authentic. So, what is character voice? As I said before, this is probably the most important thing that you can do to develop really good dialogue. Character voice is what makes your character unique. It's the distinct ways in which your character communicates with people, and it is unique to them. No two people speak or communicate the exact same way in real life, but especially in your book. And so, voice is governed by personality, background, motivations, defense mechanisms, coping mechanisms, and emotional state. That takes into account a lot of different things. One of the things I really want to emphasize here is background. One of the best things you can do for your character is really detail their background, because what happened to them before the story informs a lot about their personality, their motivations, their defense and coping mechanisms. Their emotional state is governed by that, but is also governed by the current situation. So if you really nail that background, you're already steps into getting that voice right. So the components of voice, once you go through all of that, are diction. This is what they say. How do they keep things formal? Do they like to use big words? Do they embrace slang or colloquialisms? How do their words signal their age, education, profession, background, or even ambitions? Myself, for example, I use a lot of colloquialisms. I make a lot of pop culture references. I try not to, because I get not everyone watches the same things as me, and maybe what I like isn't even pop culture, but it's culture. I tend to use fun words. I tend to use meme words. That's my diction. Pacing and rhythm. I speak a lot more quickly on these than I do in real life, and I try to enunciate more in this, but pacing and rhythm is the flow with which they talk. Long lyrical sentences or rushed fragments, ecstatic observations that bubble up one right after the other with barely a breath in between. This is the speed and the cadence at which a character talks. Body language. This, even though we're talking about character voice, it's not just about how they verbalize things. Their voice, again, is their communication method. So body language can convey personality, reflect emotion, even nod to the way your character has been trained to present themselves, leaning into that backstory again. I can't remember the exact stat, and I wish I had put it on the thing here, but there is, this recurring message that speaking is only a certain percentage of your communication style. Think about when you're talking to someone, if they have their arms crossed, if they're, looking away, if they're twiddling their thumbs or something. All of that lends to how someone communicates and how others perceive them while they're communicating. And then the tone. Tone differs from voice because tone is your character's attitude on a particular subject. You ask me about dialogue, writing dialogue, I'm very excited. You ask me about the quality of the internet that I've been getting lately, and I'm not excited. I'm very frustrated. um, but a character's tone can be resentful, moody, elated, curious, and it changes based on the circumstance they're in. So that's the other thing with voice. A lot of it is consistent, but it changes from situation to situation. And this is most apparent when someone's doing something they're very excited about, and then they're placed in a situation that has absolutely devastated them, and they're really sad about it. So these things all put together are what will make your voice unique. And if we can jump back a couple slides, I do just want to revisit this. Voice being governed by personality, background, motivations, defense mechanisms, coping mechanisms, emotional state. If you haven't thought about these items for your character, especially your main character or your very important secondary characters, start thinking about them. Like, this is your sign to start thinking about them. And again, I want to reiterate background. It is so important and it governs a lot of the other things. Then think about how their personality or what's happened to them in the past or what's pushing them forward. Think about how that influences how they communicate. And that's how you're going to come up with voice. And what we'll do is, while I delay here, I'm going to pull up an article and share in the chat here about writing a character's voice, because I could probably dedicate an entire workshop just to that topic. There we go. It is in the YouTube and Facebook chat, or will be shortly. I could probably dedicate an entire workshop just to that, but Abby has an excellent article over there where you'll find this sort of information. Okay, next up on our authentic dialogue checklist is subtext, and this is what's being said underneath what's actually being said. This is the intent behind the words or the communication. And so a lot of times what isn't being said is actually what's being communicated, or it speaks the loudest. And again, I pulled this from my friend Abby, from A Man Called Ove. And this image here is A Man Called Otto, starring Tom Hanks, which is the American redo of the movie, which is based on the book. And I haven't seen the original, I will be honest, but this movie made me shed a couple tears. I'm not ashamed to admit that. So I do recommend watching it if you're into that kind of thing. But within A Man Called Ove, we see Ove say, "I'm not asking for brain surgery. I'm asking you to drive a car. Some of the greatest twits in world history have sorted out how it works, and you will as well." And then he utters 7 words, which Parvani will always remember as the loveliest compliment he'll ever give her, because you're not a complete twit. Now, that's just an insult, really. He's a very sour man. He's very closed off. He doesn't like the rest of the world, and slowly but surely, his neighbors start encroaching on that world, and he starts letting them in. At first, not by choice, but eventually they wear down on him. And so the subtext here is, because you're not a complete twit, that isn't a compliment. If I were to say it to you, right? You're not a fool. You're not annoying. That's not a compliment. But coming from him, it is absolutely a compliment. Is as close to a compliment as you're going to get, and that makes the voice authentic, right? Just from just knowing his character, we see that line becomes one of the biggest compliments. We don't even need this little bit. Oh, sorry, we don't even need this little bit of exposition in between the dialogue to understand the subtext of this line. And if you can aim for that with your character, then you're going to go leagues farther than everyone else in terms of crafting an authentic piece of dialogue, because that's how real people talk too, right? Like with my friends, I will give these veiled compliments that also jab at them because that's just our relationship, right? The subtext is there, the nuance there. Okay, now we're going to Patty, I'm glad you're enjoying it. I do see a couple, or I see a question in there from Ilsa. Ilsa, I'm just going to save it until the end if that's all right with you. Just because we just hit the hour mark and I still got a bit to go through. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time and my own voice as I'm going through it. And we see Adri here. Most experts agree that 70 to 93% of all communication is nonverbal. And when we're writing, we don't have the benefit of having pictures in our book. So it is our job to describe, to show that nonverbal communication. And if you can really get like a character's tics or their mannerisms, how they carry themselves, what they do in certain situations with their hands or their eyes, that makes it sound more authentic when they're communicating, especially when they're speaking, and you combine those two, then you really get into that authentic communication. So thank you for that, Adri. I really like that. Okay, now we're going to talk about dialects and accents, and this is a gray area, and I'm not going to be the one to tell you not to include accents in your book, but I'm going to be the one to tell you that there are ways to do it well, and there are ways to do it that can be considered insulting. How you ultimately do it is up to you. But for the most part, I want to focus on dialects because as a written medium, it is much easier to include dialects as a way of showing someone's character and personality and background than using accents. So first up, ask yourself why. Why do they have an accent or a particular dialect in the first place? If you are doing it just to make someone seem different than the rest of the cast, that's not authentic. You automatically lose the game right there. If you're doing it because something in their backstory has them coming from somewhere else and that's relevant, then sure, we move on with that. And dialects are a great way to tie that into the story. But if it's for a shallow reason, I want you to rethink why you're including this in the first place because it can be offensive. Next, I want you to research local dialects. A dialect is individual to a place and culture. It's the way that people in a particular area, particular demographic say something, and it could be the actual way the word is structured, like dropping a G and putting an apostrophe for ing, or it could be sayings themselves. Um, Canadian dialect. This is borderline stereotyping, but I don't think anyone's actually offended by it. Is everyone thinks we all say "a" all the time? Not necessarily a dialect. Pop, pop and soda, a much better example. Some people will say soda. Some people will say pop. Where I'm from, I think we say pop mostly, but we really do both. Kind of a little melting pot situation. But if you are writing a story set in a specific area of like the Midwest United States and you get the wrong term, people will know that's not authentic. Not everyone, but people who know that area, who know someone from there or grew up there, will immediately be ripped out of your story. And sometimes they'll get mad. Maybe not over soda or pop, but like if you don't do your research into dialects and you try to use it, it will come off as inauthentic. This is especially important for I dialect. I dialect is the representation of mispronunciation due to an accent or impediment. And so this is where kind of that gray area comes in. And I'm not going to be the one to tell you that you can't use I dialect in your writing, but I am telling you that I dialect can make people feel ostracized and othered, and it can just be kind of mean to a reader, especially if you're doing it in a way that makes it comical or makes it outlandish, that's not good. That's not why we're here. We're here to craft authentic dialogue. So if you are going to use I dialect, one of them that immediately comes to mind is that dropping of the G in ing and putting an apostrophe there. A lot of people will relate that to a southern US accent. But I know from experience that's not the case for everybody in the southern United States. That's just not how it goes. Some places will do that. Some places will do other things. So if you're going to use I dialect to represent something, keep it a little more brief and make sure you're doing that research into local dialects so it reflects properly. Maybe reach out to an author from that area, ask them how they write it, and then go with that. That would be the most authentic. But if you just choose, hey, this is how I think it's pronounced because this is how someone says it, and I think that's a little funny, don't do that. Just don't. What you can use is what's called transliteration, and that's when someone's mother tongue or their first language has different grammar rules than the language that they're speaking, and those kind of bleed over into it. It also happens when they get excited and then something bleeds into that. That's a way of making it authentic, but don't assume that you know how to do that just because you heard it once or twice. Again, take the time to reach out to someone that maybe they speak French, like your character was born in France, but now they're speaking English. So reach out to that French speaker and say, hey, is there any instances where you find this happening? And then work with them to workshop that in well. That's how you get authenticity. The running theme here is that if you're trying to do something that is not your own, reach out to somebody because I don't know how to do it authentically. They do. You don't know how to do it authentically. They do. Except for niche situations where I do know how to do it. Sure. But for the most part, reach out to someone. Then, once you get that, don't be too distracting with it. Same thing with overusing non-said dialogue tags. You don't want to just lean into this so heavily that it becomes distracting for the reader. Remember, the whole point of dialogue is to have that nice flow with the rest of your story and push things forward and develop things. It is this tool for us to use. And if you're too distracting with trying to do these transliterations and throwing in these obscure dialects, then you're going to lose your readers. You're not going to have the intended impact. And then you can also, this kind of ties into the transliteration, but intersperse first languages or mother tongues. If a character doesn't know a word, or maybe they're super comfortable among other friends from their home or who speak their language, or they get emotional, they might start sprinkling in those dialects, and that comes through more. That's how you get a little more authentic. But again, don't stereotype, don't be too distracting. Work with someone to figure out when that happens. Okay, and again, I keep needing to consciously pause for water, or I'll just keep speaking until my throat goes. Okay, next up, we want to mirror real life sometimes. And I'm starting with the sometimes right away because at first we need to limit filler. So while you're mimicking or mirroring real life, there are a lot of times if you rewatch this, you'll hear me say and like and you'll hear me go on tangents. I go on tangents all the time. This is a tangent about going on tangents. You want to limit that in your dialogue because it is mostly annoying. It also borders on stereotyping at sometimes. Like I am not a Gen Z or a Gen Alpha. I don't know what the youngest is anymore. It drives me absolutely up the wall when I hear someone or read someone including likes all the time to try and show us that it's a young person speaking. Do it in other ways. Show us through their actions, show us through their attitudes. Don't show us through stereotyping, and translate that to any other form of stereotypes and cliches. Grammar rules are malleable. And I went on about being an editor before, so this kind of hurts, but dialogue doesn't have to be 100% grammatically correct in terms of the substance of the dialogue. When it comes to the tags and the punctuation and the format, yes, it has to be 100% grammatically correct. But as human beings, or again, as elves or Klingons or orcs or what have you, we don't speak 100% grammatically correct. We don't. We can't. Some people will, and that might be part of their character voice, and that's an interesting thing to do. But most people don't speak super. See, I'm doing it right now. They they don't speak correctly 100% of the time, right? And think about how often you say things like Doug and me versus Doug and I. And aside from a handful of people like myself, no one actually cares. We get what you're saying. Um, the other thing is, I was looking up the rules for like thou and thee from Shakespeare, and how we use them interchangeably now, but technically, historically, they had a different purpose, a different level of formality. No one's going to call you on that. So someone might call you on that. Most people will not call you on that, because if someone's saying it in your story, those rules are malleable. So that could be a fun conflict if someone points it out in the story. All right, and eavesdrop, like, in a polite way, and don't eavesdrop on super private conversations, or, be creepy about it. But word choice isn't the only aspect of communication. So just people watch for a little bit. Look at body language, tone, how they enunciate things, how they imply things, what colloquialisms they use. Like, there's a lot that can be learned from just observing conversation. It doesn't necessarily need to be strangers, because that can be kind of creepy if you're just staring at them and jotting down notes about them. But next time you're hanging out with your friends or your family, just as you're chatting, just be a little aware of how people are communicating, what they're doing. Subconsciously, you probably already recognize it and might integrate it into your writing, but you can pick up a lot of knowledge from that. All right. Be consistent. Um, the worst thing you can do, I think, is suddenly change a character's voice and their communication style in the middle of a book or towards the tail end of a book. The whole point of a voice is so that we get to know these characters and we connect with them, and we can more easily engage with what they're saying. If you aren't consistent with them, then that's going to lead to a problem. It'll be jarring, it'll just be confusing. So again, consistency helps us connect. This is thinking through a lens of authentic dialogue. Make them be consistent the whole time so we can connect with them. It also helps immerse your reader into that authenticity, into that high quality dialogue when you're consistent. Suddenly switching your character's voice or speaking style will be jarring, right? They'll ask why. They'll suddenly be ripped out of your book and transplanted back to wherever they're reading from. And consistency also allows your characters to grow. It provides you another avenue to challenge them, to test their morals or their convictions. It can lead to conflict, it can lead to tension, it can lead to tough choices. If they aren't consistent in how they communicate, if they just flip flop back and forth as to how's easiest to manage a situation, you're not going to have that growth. So if you want your dialogue to be authentic, challenge them, challenge their voice, morals, and reflect that in their dialogue. Okay. And then I think our last one for cliches here, or sorry, for authentic dialogue, cliches, don't use them. Just don't. It's just, there's nothing, I keep saying there's nothing worse than X, Y, or Z. So that's a cliche in itself that I've been using, and I apologize for that. But cliches are the bane of some writers' existence. So when you're writing dialogue, be mindful of what cliches you're leaning into, whether that be actual verbal ones that people are saying, or just cliches in their communication style, right? Like kicking dirt as they're speaking because they're sad, like a pouting school kid or something. Like that isn't the end of the world, but it is. I think you can do better. I think you can make something stronger than standing there kicking at the ground and pouting. So to tackle this, get feedback. Again, a lot of stuff comes back to just getting feedback on your work. You know a lot about your story, but there's going to be a lot that you don't see because you're so close to it. So when you're getting it reviewed by beta readers or critique partners or sensitivity readers, ask them to look out for cliches. This is especially true if a cliche borders or leans into a stereotype that can be offensive. You don't want to do that. Add a layer. There's an easy way to turn a cliche into something fresh, and that's usually just by adding a layer to it. Add a personality quirk or a flaw, or change their backstory a little bit. Like, cliches are grounded. I think at some point, the tropes and archetypes become cliches. And so if you can kind of find a way to wind that back and change the original trope or archetype, You do that by adding unique layers. So when you see that their communication style is a little too cliche, we go back to that dirt kicking. Or if they say cliches, just think about ways that you can tweak that just a tiny bit to make it more unique to their voice. And that's where this is kind of based in, is again their voice, that very important thing. Read it out loud. It's a lot easier to hear something if it when it's full of cheese if you actually hear it. Reading your work aloud helps with all sorts of revisions, not just finding cliches. But I I am a strong proponent of, if you're done your first draft, read the whole thing out loud. Whether you use Dabble's read to me feature or you sit there session after session just reading it out loud, you're going to find more things doing that than you will um, in your head, right? You'll gloss over particular errors, especially recurring errors that you make if you read it in your head. And one of those errors will be cliches in communication. And then finally, my favorite homework to give writers in terms of improving is read a lot. Uh, you'll identify cliches more readily if you notice them in someone else's work. So it's not like I want you to go find bad books to read, but if you read enough, you'll see, okay, this is a little overdone, or this is how someone puts a nice spin on something that could be cliche in terms of a conversation. No one ever wants to hear Luke, I am your father again, because that is so cliche at that point. But I think there is a way to workshop that particular sentiment into a way that is just as impactful as it originally was. All right. So we're going to move into some bonus tips and tricks here. I got 5 of them for you, but before that, I'm going to take some water, and I just want to see where everyone's at. Drop a comment if you're having a good time, if you're learning something, if you have any questions, because we are coming up to the Q&A. I'm thinking we will be done before the bottom of the hour, before half past. So let's see. Oh, I absolutely adore doing these kinds of things with everyone here. It is a great time, and I do hope that we're learning something. Um, and it's nice that we haven't frozen again, but fingers crossed, as I say, knock on wood, which might be a dialect kind of thing, a colloquialism unique to somewhere. But or if you don't want to share anything else, share some piece of dialect from where you live or where you grew up. I would love to see those in the chat too. But let me take one more sip of water and then we'll move on. Ilsa, you flatter me. um, everyone be like Ilsa. All right. Let's chat about bonus tips and tricks here. Again, I have 5 of them. We're not going to dwell too much on them because I've said some of them throughout, and a lot of them will be reinforced with what we've learned throughout this as well. But here we go. Tip number 1, no two people speak the same. I said this before, and it holds true. Now, it holds especially true if you've taken the time to develop that unique voice. That's where a lot of your effort should be going. And for some of the questions that we've seen here, you can omit dialogue tags once you've developed that voice, because if no two people speak the same and you're writing well thought out dialogue that is reflecting their core objective in their own way, your reader should be able to identify, at least partway through the book, maybe not right at first, but partway through the book, who is speaking based on their communication style. Tip number 2, avoid overusing names. This is doesn't have the same weight as things like no two people speak the same, but when you think about how people talk in real life or how people speak in real life, we don't say each other's names all the time. In fact, we rarely say the names of people that we're familiar with in a conversation, even people we're unfamiliar with. It would be strange if I to Ilsa, "Hey Ilsa, how's it going today?" "Oh, that's great, Ilsa." "Oh, it's lovely seeing you in these streams, Ilsa." Like, it starts to sound very repetitive and robotic and inauthentic at that point. The more you repeat, the more it's going to just kind of break down the rest of the dialogue and leave your readers scratching their heads. I got distracted there because I saw a little toolbar change by my internet logo switch, but we're good. Tip number 3, what's unsaid can speak volumes. This goes back to our subtext, but I want to expand on it just a little bit because subtext is important for making that voice authentic, but you can also lean into communication style and actions and emotions by leaving things unsaid. And one of the best examples I can think of is if your partner comes home from the day and you say, "Oh, hey, how was your day?" And they say, "Fine." Something's wrong, right? You get like a one word text response from someone, they don't need to say anything else to know for you to know that they're mad at you or something negative has happened. So, what's unsaid in certain situations can be a lot louder than what is explicitly said. It can really lean into generating conflict and growing some tension between characters when there is a breakdown in communication. So, don't think that you need to explicitly state every single thing that comes to someone's mind. You don't need to do that. And in some cases, you intentionally want to hide things. Use dialogue to reveal insights in characters. Dialogue, as we established, is a super important tool for authors. It is one of the most versatile tools we have, and it's one of the most effective tools we have. And it is particularly effective at revealing insights in characters. This doesn't mean revealing secrets. It means revealing the more nuanced aspects of their personalities. It means revealing how they feel about a particular thing because their word choice changes, because their tone changes. It reveals how they feel about someone if they're speaking passive aggressively or just straight up aggressively or fondly. Like the once you again establish that character voice, make that authentic, and then the way you play with dialogue from there really shows your reader rather than telling them how a character thinks or feels in a particular circumstance. Oh, how many times have I said this? Small talk stinks. If you're including dialogue, it needs to be there for a purpose. If you're including anything in your story, it should be there for a purpose. That purpose might be generating conflict, it might be revealing a character trait, it might be X, Y, or Z, but it is in there for a reason. Your word count is valuable. The attention span that your readers are giving you is valuable. We need to make good on the promise that what they are reading serves a purpose and is there intentionally. Small talk is okay in real life. Small talk in a book is not welcome. No one wants to read it, and it feels bad. So small talk stinks. Um, I'm not going to say if you take anything away from this, but if you can add something to the list, small talk stinks. Alrighty, now we've come to the Q&A, which is my second last slide before we're done. I know we have some questions here. And we'll start with Linda's that just came in actually because it's very relevant. What if small talk is used to display stalling by the character? So I will then argue that small talk in that situation isn't actually small talk. It is a technique employed by the character under the guise of small talk. When I say small talk stinks, I mean you're intentionally putting your characters together and just adding in dialogue to build up to something. Um, where it's like a page of, "Oh, how's the weather? Oh, it's nice. That's good. That's nice." Back and forth a couple times before they actually get to it. A quick greeting is fine. A quick, "Hey, how's it going? Oh, weekend was good." And then they talk about the crime scene that they're at. That's fine. But if you're using small talk as a tactic for that character to stall someone, then there's intent behind it. Then if you ask yourself, "Why am I doing this?" You have your answer. And so then it fits. TW, will we have access to these slides? You'll have access to the video. The slides themselves exist in a PDF that is huge in file size because of all the images of cute little stars and swirls and stuff that I included in here. So I can try and find a way to get those into existence. Otherwise, this video will exist on YouTube for, as I say, time immemorial. Um, so hopefully you can come back to that. There is also, if you're watching on YouTube, um, there is the cheat sheet, the dialogue cheat sheet that has a lot of this condensed into 3 pages. So cheat sheets, I guess, that you can download. I will probably get Robert to include that in the newsletter next week for anyone that missed it as well. So if you're not watching on YouTube or you can't seem to find it or you're having trouble downloading it, don't worry, we'll get it to you. I have here Ilsa, when having a conversation between multiple characters, how can you prevent having too many dialogue tags and still be clear on who is speaking? This, uh, my gut reaction is to go back to the character voice, right? You want to establish their unique ways of communicating, their diction that they choose, the tone that they use, the personality kind of bleeding into their dialogue, and then the reader will be able to more accurately identify. One of the things I didn't mention here when we were chatting about dialogue tags is you can omit the dialogue tag, close the dialogue with a period because you don't have a tag to connect it to, and then have the character do an action, right? Let's take my disdain for my internet provider again. Um, if I put, quote, I hate my internet service provider, period, end with the quotation marks, Doug kicked his router. Then you know that Doug said it, but it adds a little more dynamic nature to the writing without bogging it down with yet another tag. That said, you're probably being overly critical about how many tags are included. That's the benefit of said and says. They virtually go unnoticed by the reader unless your sentences are like 5 words long and then Doug said, and then a new line break, 5 words, Ilsa said. Again, repeat, repeat, repeat. Then they'll notice. But if you're doing a good job of mixing dialogue in with some prose, with some world building or action to manage that pace, then readers aren't going to notice as much as you're going to notice. I can promise you that. uh, let's see here. Nikki, should there be a difference between dialogue written for a script to be spoken aloud and a story never meant to be spoken aloud? Should there be a difference between dialogue written for a script, like a script outside of a story? I'm assuming, like if I were to write a script for a video versus a script that or versus dialogue that a character says in a story. Um, yes, and I have thoughts, but one sec. I've run out of water. So while I'm pouring water, um, script writing is an entire art into itself. And so I think there will be people more qualified than me to give insight into that. But generally, when you're script writing, you have more room for words, you have more attention gathered on you. And so you can be a little more verbose. You can employ more tools. Um, and that I guess translates to if it is a like a speech in fiction as well. Like if you're dedicating a solid chunk, then you don't have to be as concise. You don't need dialogue tags because someone's just saying what's on the script. I think I hope you said teleplay or movie there. I don't know if I totally get your question, but what I'll do actually is bring it up with Hank tomorrow during our craft Q&A, and I might get his insight into it as well, because maybe I've been chatting for an hour and a half. The fatigue starts to get to you, so I apologize if that didn't fully answer it. Um, I did see here, this isn't so much a question, but said English is my second language, took a long time to be comfortable in English. Yeah. And I hope like there are a lot of conventions in English writing that don't exist in other writing and vice versa, of course. So I hope that kind of the basics that we cover there, I say the basics is more foundational, right? Basics has kind of a negative connotation to it. It's foundational. It's what everything else is built upon. So I hope you're able to take some information away from that, Ida. Um, okay. Let me see here. We have Celeste. How many legitimate purposes should a dialogue usually serve to be considered as not wasting our readers' attention? I'd say you only need one purpose for it. And there's a little bit of wiggle room there. And I don't want to sound like I'm really harping on any form of like pleasantry or anything that's not directly purpose driven. But in my mind, I'm picturing a protagonist detective showing up at a crime scene, and there's already forensics there. There's people taking photos, there's people keeping back the crowd, that sort of thing. When someone shows up, it would seem inauthentic for no one to say, good morning, or it took you long enough, or like little throwaway line like that, that then transitions into what we're actually there for. The issue comes where if you start putting more and more of that in, and if you have multiple lines of that back and forth that ultimately leads to nothing, then your reader will feel like they are being promised something, that what you're spending these lines on will lead to something, only for it to be thrown away and discarded when you get to the actual meat of what you're there for. I hope that answered your question. I think we're on the same page there. So don't think that you have to get right to the point, but don't include enough that your reader thinks, hey, this is going to lead to something else. All right. Pat asking, could this be downloaded to templates in Dabble? Hmm, that's an interesting question because we can put images in Dabble. Um, what I'll try to do is I'll either at the end of this week or for the newsletter next week, I'll try to do what I can to condense this, make it a smaller file size, get rid of the slides used for transitions and whatnot, and we'll see what we can get it down to. I don't know, just from like a marketing point of view, like I would have to be very cognizant of how you know Dabble products are presented. I don't know how it would look in Dabble and how we'd format it, but I'll think about it. I'll see what I can do. And Celeste, I see that's very helpful. Thank you. I'm glad that answered your question. And I don't think, forgive me if I missed any of the other questions. I think we answered along, the most prominent question being, is he frozen? Excellent. So thank you for coming. I will say that this whole month we've been putting on workshops like this, or yesterday we had a workshop with Michael Laron that's on our YouTube channel if you want to watch that, about leveling up your author mindset. We've had 2 deep dive newsletters with articles and resources. We've had Feedback Friday. We've had office hours. We'll have our next one tomorrow, 2 o'clock Eastern, right here again. And we have all these bonus resources going out to you. These are all the new things that are coming with Dabble Premium. Some of the stuff will be available, like Feedback Fridays, anyone can watch, but it will be like you can only submit if you're a premium dabbler. And what I really want to do is bring that learning experience and help people grow their craft beyond just being a novel writing tool, the best novel writing tool, but a novel writing tool. We want to add to that. We want to help you out. So if you found this valuable, consider Dabble Premium. This has been an awesome month. This will live here forever. There will be more stuff coming your way and excerpts of everything. If you're not a premium member, you're not going to be completely left out. I pinky promise. Couldn't do that to you. But thank you for coming. Hopefully we see you tomorrow for Craft Q&A. Otherwise, you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you for the engagement. Thank you for the compliments. I always appreciated. And I just hope everyone has a fantastic day. We'll see you guys later.